I am Joe, and we're speaking to Cathy. Cathy, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
So hello, yeah, I'm Cathy Henwood. I work for an organisation called Wellsprings Together, and my main role is to run Feeding Bradford and Keighley, which I coordinate with. And that's our food poverty network. So we're working with lots of people involved in food poverty across the district of Bradford, in Yorkshire.
Yeah, that's great. So obviously the elephant in the room is the COVID-19 crisis. I think a lot of people on reduced incomes are you seeing increased demand for like food provision and food banks and soup kitchens and all that kind of thing?
Yes, I mean there's been a huge vision. I think the first wave it went through the roof. We were surveying food banks every week, and at one point they were serving 4 times as many food parcels as they were. I mean, now it's running about double what they were at this time last year, really. So it still is high, but not nearly as high as it was in the first wave. I think the first wave, nobody knew what they were doing. There was shortages of food. People were panicking, and so many people were new to the situation. They were in a very difficult situation. I mean, the other thing that's gone through the roof is there's been a lot of other food provision, not food banks, but people giving out food parcels, people giving out meals. And the amount of goodwill in a town like Bradford, which isn't a rich town, it's been tremendous. So many people really, really want to help.
Do you also facilitate these other groups that aren't working directly through you to help people hand out food?
Yeah, well, we work with all sorts of different groups. So I mean, as well as the food banks, we work with places which might be called soup kitchens. They're giving out meals to sort of destitute and homeless people. There's quite a number of also community centres that are giving out free meals to families who are in need, as well as that. And then there's also pay as you feel and pay as you can sort of cafes, and pay as you feel or pay as you can sort of food stalls as well. So there's a big range of provision. And we've also been supporting a lot of holiday providers who do like holiday activities. This year it's been holiday packs of activities rather than necessarily a face-to-face provision, but that's always included food as well. So because we know sort of families, there's been a lot of stuff that in the news, hasn't it, about families struggling without free school meals and things as well.
Do you find the people who need this food, do you find they prefer the pay-as-you-go or pay what you can methods, or do they prefer getting the food parcels delivered?
I think there's quite a range, but we hear lots of really, in a way, heartwarming stories of people feeling, even if they're only paid £3 or £4 and they can go and choose their food, that they feel just so much better. They feel like they're taking responsibility for their families. And we know benefits rates, and we know that we're a low wage economy, and we know that a lot of people are short of money, but people often prefer feeling they're not getting charity if they can. And we know there's a real need for free food bank food as well. So I'm not saying there isn't a need for that. People can be in real crisis. But we kind of feel there's a stepping stone which maybe keeps some people out of needing a food bank and help some people move on from needing a food bank, to be able to pay something towards their food. It also allows those organisations to have that bit of money that maybe allows them to have membership to get redistributed food or pay for a vehicle to go to the supermarket to pick up some food they might be donated. So it gives them some running costs, which makes things more sustainable. So it's quite a good model, which I think is something we're really promoting as Feeding Bradford and Keighley too.
How has COVID affected the way that you're giving food, and like for example these cafes where it's pay what you can? How has COVID affected that? Obviously, eating in a place now is not really possible. And
that's right. So many of them have gone to takeaway models, whether it's the free food providing or the pay as you can sort of things that they may be. For example, some of them, they put it on Facebook. We've got, this is what we're cooking today. Let us know and put your order in, and they'll do it that way. Look, community centres are doing that. Some of them are ringing in orders. And then, of course, the places which are serving the more destitute and homeless people, which may not be the sort of more cafe style, that then they just provide the food and people queue up and get it. So that's a different sort of story as well. But yeah.
Is there quite a lot of resources need to do take out? We spoke to a mutual aid group before, and they were talking a lot about contactless card readers, which you managed to get off the internet. Is that like a necessity for these things, or are there any other like pieces of equipment people need to actually be able to do these, provide this?
I don't know really. I think you know, a lot of the pay as you can, they just have a sort of pot and people put £2 or £3 in, or some of them have a membership. There's been a new model come recently that is being promoted by one or two of the organisations we work for, and they're actually sort of got a subscription, and they sometimes they time that, and people choose to have that timed when their benefits come in, that they put some of their money into that, and they know they've got a month's worth of sort of food every week to come to, and that's their choice, and that's sort of done electronically. But other people, it's just a few pounds in a pot, so it's running very different ways. I mean, one of them I was really interested. They've just a model they're starting to work out. They're working with credit unions. I don't know if you know about credit unions, but so the person pays £6 a week, but £1 of that goes into savings, and that allows them to start to build up a credit history, because a lot of them have got very poor credit histories. It allows them to build up a tiny bit of savings. It may only be, you know, £20 over quite a period of time, but they're starting to build a credit record. They're starting to build savings. They're starting to give themselves that little bit of security. You know, I think that's a really interesting model that is just being developed sort of in Bradford. One of the first places I think has been doing that directly with linking food and the credit union, which again is quite exciting. It might not sound sort of glitzy and sexy, but it is a really good model, I think.
Yeah, it sounds it. £20 is a big difference over £0, isn't it? When you definitely need a bus fare to get to somewhere for a job meeting or something like that.
And it's awful, isn't it? And the way the society is, that the poorest people have to pay the most for credit. Yeah. So if they do need to borrow money, if you're like me, you've got a steady job, I can borrow money reasonably cheaply if I need to. However, if you're unemployed, if you've been on benefits for years, all you've got to do is a payday loan, or worst of all, a sort of a loan shark, and you're going to pay, you know, hundreds of percents, thousands of percents sometimes of interest. So something like the credit union allows people to access sort of reasonable price credit. It keeps them out of the hands of loan sharks, which are just evil people. And I think the payday loans people, they're licensed, legal, but not particularly good model either, are they? Preying on the poorest people. So anything like that, I think, really sort of helps as well, doesn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah, and how do a lot of these places get funding for what they're doing then?
So there's a big range. Some of the what you might call soup kitchens, or those. I mean, some of them are not even registered charities. They're just little groups of people who got together on Facebook initially. Maybe they've collected donations, and they do it entirely out of their own pockets, plus things that they don't get donated. And some of them are very, very successful at getting donations as well. Others are registered charities or community centres or churches or mosques, and they rely a lot on donations as well. We have been working with the council, and the council, you know, during COVID, we started in March. Sort of, I said to them, you know, the food banks are really starting to struggle. It's sort of happening so fast, and the council have been putting money for food into food banks as well, sort of directly. So in that way, they've been propping up basically by ordering food, enabling then the food banks to order food directly from a supplier, which meant that food banks, you know, who were struggling with donations, and some of them now, you know, are managing to be self-sufficient again, but some of them were struggling with donations, some of them are still struggling with donations, allows them to order extra food to help keep themselves going as well. So it's a very much a mixed model, but donations and goodwill, I think, is a big part of it. And I kind of think in a way government shouldn't, this is maybe my opinion, shouldn't be actually stepping in and paying for crisis food. Government should be paying ensuring there's decent wages, and government should be ensuring benefits rates are high enough. I mean, crisis food is crisis food, and it isn't the place of the state really to be providing it, except in these extraordinary circumstances we're in right now.
Yeah, a system that doesn't require it in the first place would probably be a better system.
Well, that's certainly our aim, to look at what's driving this food poverty, and what, you know, trying to tackle the root causes as well. And we do feed information in. Feeding Bradford and Keighley is part of national network, Feeding Britain, coordinates that, and it started as a sort of cross-party parliamentary group on hunger. So we've got direct links in to feed information into you know, anybody in Parliament who's willing to listen around food and food poverty as well. Because that I feel is a crucial part of what we try and do as well, so that, you know, we can really sort of give evidence about, you know, for example, if they do decide that they may U-turn yet, but to take away the uplift on universal credit, we'll be giving lots of evidence about how much difference that makes to, you know, increase in demand of food banks and things like that. Because I think, you know, without giving the Parliament the sort of reality checks of what's happening in the ground, then you know, it's easier for them to make the wrong decisions without, I don't know, my role, I'm not supposed to be political with a large P, but I think, you know, all politicians need to know the reality on the ground.
Yeah, everybody needs correct data to make correct decisions, don't they?
Yeah.
Regardless of what your position is.
And you know, I think people like Marcus Rashford and other people have been hugely sort of great by being a sort of popular name who's managed to really force the government to U-turn on certain things as well, which I think has been tremendous asset, because people have been campaigning in the background, and in a way he's been the figurehead for a lot of background campaigning, but he's made people listen, and that's really important.
Yeah.
Pushed it over the edge.
In the sort of longer term history then of this, I'm guessing, well, how long have you been involved in food banks, and in the last 10 years has the usage gone up and come back down again, or has it gone up and stayed high?
It's gradually gone up year on year, I think, really. I've only been involved for about 4 years, and so I suppose my knowledge doesn't go back that far, but certainly the 4 years I've been involved, it's gone up every year. And of course this year we've taken a huge hike up, and it was at its worst sort of in April, May, June, and it has come down a lot this year from that peak, but whether it will return to where it was last January and February pre-pandemic, I don't know, because we're facing a lot of other worries, aren't we? Will there be increases of food prices because of Brexit? There'll be increases of redundancies probably after the furlough schemes closes. I do expect we're going to have quite a few years, or at least year yet, for the food bank use.
It's looking that way. With the food prices going up, are there any deals available for food providers like soup kitchens or food banks from suppliers? Are there any discounts or deals available?
Yes, I mean, it's quite interesting. There's things that the general public probably won't be aware of. There's an organisation called Fair Shares, for example, which works with many of the national suppliers, and they do two different things. They coordinate what they call Fair Share Go, which means that they coordinate the food banks and other charities to have a slot to go and pick up food from the supermarkets, which may be sort of short date food. And they also work with suppliers. So anything Kellogg's or anybody else might say, well, actually, we've got an overrun, or we've got a load of packaging where the printing came out wrong, and we can't sell this. So they'll let Fair Shares have that on a national sort of level, and that gets redistributed. So organisations can pay £25 a week and get, you know, quite a lot of crates of food, way over £25 worth of food for that. And that's one way that organisations can get food at a low value, a low price. There's also in Bradford, we've got somewhere called Storehouse, which is a smaller version of that. They work directly with Fair Shares, but they also work with some companies in Bradford and do the same thing with distributing food. And then there's charitable donations, and some of the many of the supermarkets will give away food. There can be an issue, of course, because a lot of the supermarkets want to give away food that is on a very short date, and you know, you're not legally allowed to give people food that's past its use by date. But if they want to give you food at 9 o'clock in the evening and it runs out of date the next day, then it's not a lot of use. So there is a level that some of that is for supermarkets wanting to get rid of food that they can't sell, but there is always some good donations in there as well. So yeah, there's each organisation makes its own arrangements really in different ways, but there are things out there to support them.
Right, yeah, and like you said, there are legal obligations when you're running one of these organisations. What are it? So you can't sell food which is out of date. Are there any other rules people need to be aware of if they're looking to get involved in this?
Yeah, I think one thing actually we were talking. We have a network meeting once a quarter, and we were talking last week about there's a difference between best before and use by dates, and people get confused about that. And supermarkets, some things like meat have a use by date, and you really can't sell it after that date. But if it's past its best before date, like bread has a best before date, because even if it's a bit stale, you can make bread and butter pudding, or you can do something with it. So it's educating the public to understand, and educating providers to understand the difference between that. Even if you're giving away food, you have to sort of meet health and safety regulations, food hygiene regulations, all those things. And certainly if you're cooking food, you're supposed to meet food hygiene regulations. Some of our very small informal groups probably don't, but I don't worry whether they've got the bit of paper, as long as they're doing things safely and are working correctly. But they could be pulled up if they didn't have the right bits of paper.
Right. Officially, is a qualification people need then?
There's no qualification, though. I would suggest there's a food hygiene level 2, which you can actually do online for about £20–30, and I'd always suggest people did that. It's not a difficult thing, and it teaches you all about sort of temperatures of food to keep it safe, whether it's cold temperatures or hot temperatures to get it up to a sterile point. And it's basic information that anybody who's cooking food to serve to somebody else really should know. So certainly if anybody gets funding, they need to show they've got that sort of qualification, and it's just a straightforward, easy thing to do as well. But it's one of the things we do is advise people about these things. We let people know some of the basics that they need to know. We put people in touch if they're doing something similar with somebody else who's doing it, so they can share good practice and learn from each other. Most organisations are very happy to show other people what they're doing, and help them on their way to learn about how to move. But I guess my biggest message is people shouldn't assume that nobody else is doing it, and try and get in touch with other people who are doing similar sort of work first, rather than just reinvent the wheel and start again. It's often better to join forces with somebody else.
And if people are in the Bradford area, then can they get in touch with you as one of the coordinators of the effort?
Yeah, so there's two things. There's one, we've got a website that's a new thing that In Church's Storehouse sort of did the background work, and that's called Find Food in Bradford, and it's at www.bradfordfoodbanks with an S .org.uk, and that lists sort of the food banks, the hot meal providers, and the pay-as-you-feel cafes that want to be on there, and it also tells you how to make donations if you want to volunteer. So it allows people to access food, but also if they want to help others, how to do that as well, and that's a really good thing. And I can also give you my email address, and people can contact me directly at Feeding Bradford. Should I give that to you now?
Yeah, I'll put it in the description as well.
Put it in the description. Yeah, that might be the best way, because it's
yeah.
You've got it, haven't you, Daniel? So.
How many different groups are you within the Bradford Keighley area then that you're involved in coordinating?
So we've got about 30 food banks. We've got around 40 or 50 meal providers, big and small. At the moment, we know of about 10 or so of the low-cost food markets. And then anybody who's really, any organisation that is involved in poverty relief or anything is welcome to be a member of our organisation as well. We've got, in terms of those which are directly members of us, we've probably got about 90 direct members of Feeding Bradford and Keighley. And we try, and although we're not, we just try and represent people's views. We try and hear what people think their concerns are. We try and then work on things that they're concerned about and represent their views.
Do you think that these, the ones that exist now, are covering the area enough? Are there any areas that are being missed out?
In terms of food banks and things, we have covered every postcode in the whole of the district, but then maybe some areas there is poverty in better off areas. And for example, there is a food bank in Ilkley, and they're surprisingly busy. You wouldn't think they would be in Ilkley, but some areas you do have to travel a bit further. And I mean, COVID has actually caused a few more new food banks to start up, and that has filled some of the gaps where people might have had to cover quite a district area, sort of quite a distance. In terms of the sort of soup kitchens and things, and I think there is less of that they tend to be in the centre areas. So people in central Bradford, there's plenty of provision, and in central Keighley, but I guess somebody in Shipley, where I live, or Bingley would probably have to travel to one of those places to get a free hot meal. Do we want one everywhere of those? I'm not 100% sure. I was speaking before to Daniel before we started about sometimes there's an issue about over provision as well, because some people, especially people with mental health and addiction problems, can rely on getting free food and free clothes and things, and they are on benefits, and they may be using their benefits therefore to prop up their addiction, and that is a real issue. I think there's some times generosity can have a double edge to it, and it keeps people alive by feeding them, but if it's keeping people's addiction going as well, it's not necessarily in their best interest long term, and it becomes very difficult. I think at its best, food can be a door in to people like that, to build trust, and then help them, to support them into programs that might help them longer term. And I think the best food providers for that group are people who do the extra, go the extra mile, do build that trust and help people move on from a situation. And the same with the food banks. The best food banks are doing a lot of work to refer people on to maybe advice places, or building their confidence, or linking them in, with other people who can help them. I think that's the message across the board, really, that giving people free food is a sticking plaster. What we need is them to move on, have the help they need to move on to be independent, and also what we need is decent wages and decent level benefits, of course.
Unfortunately, at least in the short term future, with COVID and the sort of economic downturn that we're having with it, it looks like there won't be the increase in wages and increase in benefits that people need. Do you think that Bradford and Keighley are ready for the potential mid-term effects of this? And because also you've mentioned that a lot of these places rely on donations, as more people come off furlough and potentially lose their jobs, is that going to be significantly affect the amount of donations that can go into these places?
It is a worry, isn't it? And all I can go back on, I suppose, when I talk to food banks and places, is that we met the crisis in April, May, and we'll meet the crisis again, I guess they're saying. We have got very good relationships with the council, and they are listening. They want to make sure food banks aren't running out of food. And also, I think that there's increasingly, I'm putting across the views, and people are listening, that the sort of intermediate, the sort of pay as you can market stalls and things are a very good thing as well. And I think the council has listened to that. I certainly make sure I keep the council in touch. We collect figures every 4 weeks now from food banks, so that the council can see those details. And we're certainly lobbying for the current support we've got runs out in March, but we've already got I can't say we're guaranteed until it's been signed off, but we should have funding moving well into towards the end of this year, at least. And as need arises, we'll keep in touch with them. So I do feel we're in a reasonable place, and we've certainly got a lot better relationship with our council than in some areas across the country.
Is there any help coming from the health services? I know social prescribing is the thing they want to do, and obviously helping get people through. And also, like you were saying, with addiction, getting people rebuilding their social bonds, getting them in a positive community is a key thing. Food banks is possibly a way to do that. Is there any help coming from the health service?
Well, we do work with a project called the Hops team, and that's a housing outreach partnership, or maybe it's housing outreach partnership, maybe the S is an S. And they bringing together the Bridge project, Project 6, so their drug and addiction projects, Bevan House, which is a health like a GP, but it's for homeless and addicts, and also refugees and asylum seekers, and various other partners involved in housing, and they work closely with the council as well, and they're trying to sort of deal with that particular side of problems, and get people into services, doing the outreach and getting people into services, and then we're trying to link in our food providers into that, so that they understand what's helps available for people as well. So we do try and link in that way. And I think that's one of my roles, is to make sure that these new providers, know what else is out there, and understand how they can get people the help that they need.
Sounds like a big part of what's needed in food banks and what's already being done is signposting then.
Yes, and of course COVID's had a big effect on that, which isn't great, because it used to be that people would come into a food bank, they'd sit down with somebody who would go through with them and find out a bit more and signpost them. And now, because of COVID safety, there's a lot more. You fill in the form and we'll give you a food bag. We'll either deliver you a food bag, or we'll or you'll come to the door and we'll give you one straight out. And so we have lost some of that signposting. And I think people are very keen to get that back as soon as possible. One thing again that's happened in Bradford, and not happened everywhere in the country yet, I don't think, is that they put some of the food banks and things higher up on the list to get priority vaccinations, because I think seeing that people, often relying on volunteers, some of which may be early retired people, or older people, they're doing face-to-face work, and protecting those people is really important as well, to enable them to continue to do the great work that they're doing, and hopefully in the longer run can get back to doing much more of the signposting things. Some of that has suffered. We actually, one of the projects we run, we have some funding, is to put an advice worker into some of the food settings, and what we have been able to do is put leaflets in saying, if you've got need advice problems, phone this number, and offered a telephone sort of support service that way, but it's not ideal.
Yeah, and I was going to ask then, is there any provision, if depending on how long this lasts, to set up a sort of more online meetings? Obviously that's a lot more time consuming than when it's done in person to signpost, but if depending on how long this lasts, it sounds like something that might be useful. I don't know.
Yeah, I know that the advice providers, the mainstream advice providers, Citizens Advice Bureau and the others in Bradford, come April, their contract's going to include that they have to have direct links with the food providers. We've negotiated that with the council, who do commission the services, and they're going to sort of strengthen those bonds between food banks and food providers. Our pilot project, where we've got one advice worker working in 4 food settings, has really shown that more direct link is really beneficial, because people, often they're really in a bad place, and actually they don't want to have a wait 2 or 3 weeks for an appointment. They want to have an appointment directly, and somebody that they can, be recommended directly by the food bank is better than referred directly, and is better than that signposting when people maybe find it too hard if they're having to do too much themselves. I suppose it's, if they can directly get access, it's far better. So that's something we're hoping will sort of kick in sort of come March. There'll be more direct links between food banks and the advice service.
Okay, yeah, that'll be easier on the sort of mid long term. And just quickly going back to the vaccination thing, who was the originator of that decision? Was it Bradford Council, or was it pressure from the food banks on Bradford Council?
We have a consortium of voluntary service organisations, and we've been working very closely with the council and also the local hospital trusts and care trusts. So it was a combination of joint working that we've been doing across the sort of pandemic that I think has really enabled them to put forward that actually it's not just the government, the NHS staff that are doing face-to-face work with very vulnerable people, but you know, it also includes some voluntary organisations, and they prioritise sort of food banks and the people dealing with homeless and drug and alcohol conditions, because they're doing sort of face-to-face work in a way that's impossible to entirely socially distance.
Is there any language support for people who speak English as a second language who need to access these services?
It is something that probably isn't as good as it could be. One thing we've been trying to work with to broaden out is to make sure that we're aware that some of the organisations that haven't been traditionally calling themselves a food bank are doing food, and you know, certainly we're trying to reach out to make sure that those organisations are part of our network, and some of those have, you know, much better language skills than maybe your average food bank that might be run by a church or something. But I mean, having said that, some churches are very diverse in a city like Bradford anyway, so you know, it can really vary. I wouldn't say, I think the thing is to reach out to the communities and make sure that referrals can happen, that actually coming to, if you've got a referral and you come to a food bank with your token, then you don't need much language. So it's making sure, I think, reaching out to get referrals happening from across all sorts of community organisations, large and small, and then also reaching out to other people providing food and saying, come and be part of the network, come on up, join on our website if you want to be public, or not if you don't want to be public. Some people, you know, don't want to be too public about what they're doing, they're just doing it in a small area, and that's fine too, but we can still share good practice and information with them.
How do people get referrals, and what are they exactly?
So our food bank website that I mentioned before, and maybe you can put it in the links below, I can email that to you to make sure you've got it right. That tells you where, so you can put your postcode in and it tells you the food banks that cover your area, and then it will tell you how to get a referral to that food bank. So some of them will take self-referrals, some of them it will tell you the organisations that you need to approach to get a referral. So really it varies from food bank to food bank. There's always a risk with the ones which take self-referrals that they will end up having some people that maybe aren't as in greater need as others. But I think they accept that's part of what they do to make it easy for people to access.
Are there any medium-term plans then to expand these services? Looking at COVID could go on for quite a while. It's just government's just expanded the date that schools are going to push back the date that schools are going to start.
Yes, I mean, I think I'm working with the council. The council have had quite a lot of money in for families, and for the last 3 years we've been involved in pilots funding sort of holiday schemes with food, and this year, for the first year, I think they've decided they're not a pilot anymore. We've been saying it's self-evident for several years that we don't need another pilot, but they are putting I think 2.2 million into which is a decent amount of money this year, to Bradford to fund holiday food and activity provision during the school holidays. And I'm working to make sure that the learning of all the years we've been doing it as a voluntary sector isn't lost as it transfers to being a bigger pot with the council. So I mean, that's something I think, because of COVID and things, and because of the bad press that you know, free school meals and things, of course the government, they have listened and they have put money in this year at least to all councils across the country to run schemes for those on free school meals at least. So those things are things that you know are really plus points, and I think, you know, things have moved forward in those areas, and you know, we'll be reaching out, and hopefully every child on free school meals will have access to a programme near them. But so that's work with the council and the voluntary sector and schools and things all putting together, hopefully.
What kind of activities are in the holiday activity packs?
So this year, I mean, it's I mean, obviously in previous years we've done lots of face-to-face activities and things. This year there has been some face-to-face socially distanced things, great sort of ideas, like sort of street dancing and things, which have been a lot of fun that people have done. But the activity packs might involve access to watching a video on television, and then the ingredients to cook the meal that's been demonstrated on YouTube or something like that. It might include everything from quizzes to online to craft materials or sports materials, with instructions of how you can play a game in your garden, or how you can do something in the house, or how you can go and do a nature walk and collect certain leaves, or whatever activities to get people out, as well as activities indoors. So it's been very varied, and some organizations have sort of done that in just providing some toys and some quizzes and things, and other people have maybe done very bespoke sort of things where they've really found out about what individual young people want, and try to sort of help that individual child to sort of flourish and build up to get a certificate, and maybe a little qualification of all the things that they've built up to do, which is, I think, been very encouraging for young people.
Yeah, before COVID, then were you also having cooking classes? Because it sounds like that's what.
Yes, I mean, we've always sort of felt like, in fact, we've called our programs sort of working with others called the healthy holidays, and it's always had a bit of a sort of, we want to encourage healthy activity and healthy eating, and getting kids cooking is the best way of getting them to eat sort of vegetables and things. If they've cooked it themselves, or and made something themselves, they're far more likely to eat it. So there's often been a component of that, getting families cooking together, getting children cooking. It's all a good way of sort of helping people shift towards sort of healthier lifestyles and sort of healthier diets.
That's definitely something we need in this country going forward, I think. Yeah, is there anything else you'd like to add, or have we covered most of it?
I don't know, I'm trying to think of what areas we haven't talked about. I've talked about the website, I've talked about different sorts of provision. I suppose I'd really want to encourage any organisation that ends up listening to this, that if they're not involved in us and they live in the Bradford area, Bradford and Keighley district, to get in touch with me, and I'd like to hear from all sorts of organisations. I'm very keen to reach out to organisations from different cultural groups, because I know, although we have reached out to quite a lot of different groups, there are many out there we haven't reached out to, and that's something I'd really like to put right, and sort of reach out to as many groups as we can.
Yeah, definitely a go-to. In fact, hopefully we can help you with that.
That's great. We can work together. Yep.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, so thanks so much for speaking to us, Cathy. I'll just speak to you again in the future. Hopefully everything's under control in the future. We'll see.